Okay, welcome again. Thank you so much for being here. Today is the fifth Sunday of Lent, and during the season of Lent, we've been looking at kind of two themes, really. One is food, and the other is justice. And we're looking at, in some respects, how those things actually are both part of the same thing. And yesterday, in fact, was a really great day for us in that regard, because I want to say a big thank you to everybody who came out and worked on the farm. We had our first spring planting day, so we got all those crops into the ground. Had a whole load of people come out from our community. Many of you invited friends and family. We had people from the local community too. So it was a really great day, and we'll obviously see the fruit of that literally in the future when those crops start growing and we can give them away to people in need. And then afterwards, many of us joined with other people in this local community here in Burtonsville to take a stand for justice, to take a stand for solidarity with people who are feeling very vulnerable at the moment. And that was a really wonderful time as well. So thank you for everybody who was able to make it to that. We're going to be looking today at the issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, things that I think in many respects have become very political or politicized in recent years. But we're going to look at them through the lens of Jesus and what it means to follow Jesus. And we're going to kick off with a story that we actually referenced this story a few weeks ago when we were talking specifically about food justice, because it's a passage that comes before a passage we read then. It's in Luke 14. And in that passage, we read this: One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. So Jesus is being watched. And I don't know, maybe some of us could feel like we're in that situation a little bit at the moment. It's a bit of a setup, right? It's the Sabbath. So we almost feel like there's a trap being set. And sure enough, there in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, so the religious authorities, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So Jesus, he's being watched, he's being kind of set up, but notice how Jesus takes the initiative and kind of leans into them. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And they had nothing to say. Now, we don't know whether they're not saying anything because they're just waiting for Jesus to condemn himself and trap himself, or because they're genuinely baffled. We don't really know. But this sounds like a trap. And before we go on, because there's a bit more of this passage to go, let's just think about this for a moment. This is ludicrous, right? This is absolutely ludicrous. This would be like, say you're driving along and a child jumps out into the middle of the road, and you do an amazing maneuver. You swerve and avoid the child, and then you get pulled over because you didn't signal when you changed lane, right? Okay, so should we heal somebody? This is in Jesus' case, right? Should he heal somebody or follow the rules of the Sabbath? It's ludicrous, but I think what the writer is doing for us here is just setting up how ludicrous religion can be, how whacked out religion can be, how whacked out power can become, how whacked out authority can become, how out of touch and out of contact and sort of almost obtuse it can be about reality. So then we go on to hear a bit more about Jesus. This is now Jesus noticing. When he noticed, so Jesus is watching as well. He's been very observant. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. So remember, he's still in the house of this Pharisee, a prominent Pharisee. So there's some hierarchical issues going on here. Jesus tells them this story. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. Nobody wants that. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Loads we could say about this passage, but we're not going to. But what Jesus seems to be saying here is, look, food and dinner and community, even the one, he's talking about a wedding, but he's perhaps indirectly talking about the meal he's having in that place. He's saying, look, this should be about equity and inclusion. It should be about belonging, rather than turning it into some hierarchical control power thing where there are certain people to get the best seats And social status and privilege actually are propagated and just cemented and increased. Jesus seems to be flipping that around by telling this story. Then he goes on to say to his host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, we could read this in a very condescending way, right? So, when it talks there about the lame, the blind, the crippled, the poor, there's the poor people in society. We could think about it in a very patronizing kind of way. But Jesus here is highlighting groups of people in society then who were viewed as outsiders, who were actually viewed as being problems. We've talked about this before, but in that day and in that culture, the prevailing perspective was that people were poor, people were struggling for different reasons. We've got some groups of people here highlighted because it was their fault. They'd sinned or their families had sinned, and it was judgment from God. And not only that God was judging the whole nation, and perhaps even, that was the cause for the Roman occupation at the time, God judging these people, that's what the view was, because of all the people who are messing up and not following the rules and not doing the right religious things. And Jesus is just flipping this around again and saying, invite those people, include those people. Jesus clearly doesn't believe that at all about, God's judging these people. But what he's saying is, do not blame them. Include, invite. And so that's the essence, and that's the source that we're coming to when we think about these whole issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. We're doing it, we're wrestling with it because it's something that Jesus wrestles with. And Jesus is being very categorical about this. He's saying how important this is, how vital it is. And we might, in our present day, and there's a question in the discussion questions this week that relates to this, we might have other categories of people that are currently being blamed for the poor state of the nation. I think the poor always get blamed, whatever culture, whatever history we're in. But maybe it's transgender people, maybe it's immigrants, maybe it's people of color. Fingers are being pointed all the time. And Jesus is saying, don't point the finger, include, invite. That we need more equity, we need a deeper sense of belonging if we're going to become a healthier society. Now, you may remember a few weeks ago, we also looked at a passage in the Hebrew Scriptures, which this whole section here in Luke alludes to, really, which is where Jesus, not Jesus, because Jesus wasn't around then in those days, but the Hebrew Scriptures have a law that was all about returning land to the original landowners every 50 years. In other words, some people are successful and some people are less successful, and wealth tends to accumulate. Land, which was the means of production essentially then in an agrarian culture, certainly the means of production of food, the means of production becomes concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, more powerful people. And so every 50 years, that was redistributed. The land was parceled back off to the original landowners. We don't know how that happened exactly. It must have been an administrative nightmare. May not really have happened all that successfully, but the intent is there because there's an understanding that structures and collective groups of people, not just individuals, become unjust or can become unjust over time. And the Christian scriptures kind of get at this issue in a variety of different ways. In Ephesians, Paul says, "For our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." In other words, there are forces at work. And some of these sound very spiritual, things like cosmic powers, but some of them sound very physical, like rulers, authorities. In other words, institutions, structures, religions, political systems can become strongly influential in ways that perhaps it's hard for us to see. And they can become unjust. And again, this is a reason for us looking at issues of injustice, because just like Jesus was observing intently, we need to be able to see in a way that it's perhaps harder for us to see at times. But I think we can all relate to this influence, this sort of unseen influence in our lives at a very personal level as well. So here's Paul again in a more up-to-date translation of the Bible in Romans 7, talking about our personal lives. And here's what he says: I can anticipate the response that's coming. I know that all God's commands are spiritual, but I'm not. Isn't this also your experience? Yes, I'm full of myself after all. I spent a long time in sin's prison. What I don't understand about myself is that I decide one way, but then I act another, doing things I absolutely despise. I think we can all probably relate to that, right? So if I can't be trusted to figure out what is best for myself and then do it, it becomes obvious that God's command is necessary, the law, in other words. But I need something more. For if I know the law but still can't keep it, and the power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions, I obviously need help. I realize that I don't have what it takes. I can will it, but I can't do it. I decide to do good, but I don't really do it. I decide not to do bad, but then I do it anyway. My decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something has gone wrong deep within me and gets the better of me every time. I think we can all relate to that, and the fact that we might have the best intentions, and we even know what is right, but we still fall into unhealthy anger, impatience, unkindness, meanness. And why is that? Well, it's all these other influences on our lives. Like our parents. They're always responsible, right? You know, our family of upbringing, having a bad day at work. I mean, all these different things, some of them are more sinister than others, that are at work in us to cause us to do things that we don't really want to do, that may be not good things. Likewise, systems and structures can operate like that. And Paul goes on to talk about this more in Colossians in, I think, a very redemptive way. Because in Colossians, and we've got to be careful with passages like this because they're very mystical, very theological and philosophical, and also somewhat poetic, I think. But the Son, I think he's referring to Jesus there, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers of authorities. So he's talking about these forces that we may not easily see, but they're still very effective, very, very impactful. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So it's almost like Jesus is kind of owning all this brokenness, all the broken collective systems of humanity. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. That's a word that I think should scare us, right? Supremacy. But what kind of supremacy are we talking about? What kind of power are we talking about? For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. By making peace through his blood shed on the cross. In other words, what Jesus seems to be doing here is just owning all this collective mess, this collective injustice, the power gone wrong, if you like. And rather than just defeating it, owning it by sacrificial love, reconciling it all through sacrificial love. It's a new kind of power. It's a new kind of supremacy. It's not what we would imagine it to be. It's not like Jesus is really nice so that he becomes supreme and then he can start kicking butt and taking names. No, this is a new way of exercising power. And that's what we're called to do as well. Jesus demonstrated this very physically, very practically, just before he died. In John's Gospel, it says it was just before the Passover festival, which is coming up. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who are in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, so we're back to dinner. And the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So this is a poignant moment. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. This is a supremely powerful moment for Jesus. And that he had come from God and was returning to God. What are the two biggest questions we have as human beings? Where did we come from and where are we going? Jesus gets it, right? So this is a really amazing moment for Jesus. He knew that he came from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So here we have a new definition of power, a new way of exercising power. If you like, a new way of exercising privilege, which is all about inclusion. It's all about reconciliation. It's all about equity. It's all about belonging and creating a new way of living, a new way of being human, a new way of being together. And so with that, I want to welcome Sarah and Hubert to come up and join us. Let's give them a big round of applause. And they're going to talk to us about some practical ways we can live this out.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Wow. Whenever I have the chance to be up here, I just love seeing everyone and just the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I have been really enjoying this series and the different themes that we've heard through the week. So this morning we're going to talk a little bit about what the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean. And we're going to also talk a little bit about the context of now and what is going on and how we got here. And then we're going to talk about what we can do as people of faith. Warning, there's going to be one time I'm going to ask you to turn and talk to someone. So you might talk to somebody you came with. You might talk to somebody that's sitting near you, by you, or that you don't know. So just a heads up about that. So let me see if I'm doing this right. Okay, so thinking about what do these concepts mean, and I just really appreciate Matthew setting the definitions up and the concepts in a faith context. Because I don't know about you, but most of the time I'm talking about these topics with other people, like in work, etc. They're not defined or talked about in a faith context. So I find it particularly valuable to be in this place and situation and have that framework. And thinking about these terms in the context of Scripture and in the teachings of Jesus Christ, the first questions we have for you are which of these terms are clearest for you and which is the most challenging? I'm putting this up here, right here. This says easiest or hardest, but I think of it in terms of clearest or most challenging. So before we put you on the spot, I'm going to ask Hubert, what is one answer to this question for you?
And for those of you who are like, who's this guy? Which I'm always struck by because I've been here a while. I work with middle school and high school kids over in the barn. If you have any teenagers or middle school or high school kids, we're on the barn typically every Sunday. And it's been a pleasure to have folks who've presented here to come to present over in the barn and have a conversation with our young people. And I'm an elementary school teacher for about 15 years or so, and then about 20 years before that, worked in community organizing and organizational development, which is the root of how I do my teaching with my students. And so for me, the clearest of these is the issue of diversity. Teaching here in this region, I am amazed by how much diversity that my classroom has in terms of kids, in terms of their backgrounds, their families, their interests, and it's also, for me, almost kind of, for me, because I find it funny, the beginning of the school year, we get information on our students, but it's not really much. It's things like, what's the race or ethnicity of your students? And often I'll have a list of students, and these number of students are African American / Black. And then as I talk to my students, well, they may be first generation in this region from Ethiopia, or for Eritrea, or from Cameroon, or Dominican Republic. So the first languages they speak isn't English. Their backgrounds are much more incredibly broad than from what I grew up with. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and so learning and having a communication with my class from about diversity is where we kind of set our foundation to be successful throughout the year. So it's something that's particularly clear and important to me, but I know that's not true for everyone.
Okay, so my answer to which question, which term is the clearest is also the one that's the most challenging, and it's that concept of jubilee and justice that we find in the Bible. And I think back when I was in college, I grew up in a church, and when I was in college, I had kind of stepped away from my faith because I was seeing that it was like all about salvation, but there was like all this stuff going on in the world that I was like really passionate about. And I didn't see a lot of people of faith addressing those issues. And I got involved with Habitat for Humanity, which is a Christian nonprofit that is focused on affordable housing and eliminating, at the time it was like eliminating poverty housing from the face of the earth. And the way that Habitat works is about putting your faith into action, but also biblical economics. And it was about not charging interest to the poor. So Habitat, you help build your house and you pay it back at an interest-free loan. So that biblical economics and that concept of jubilee, I know it's not exactly the same as jubilee, that really appealed to me. And honestly, I was like, redistribute wealth. Yes, here are people getting money to people who will, it's not just like a one-time, here's a handout. It's like they will own this home. And that's a foundation for generational wealth. So that was something that really like appealed to me. But I think one of the challenges, like, okay, well, why isn't that happening more, right? It's in the Bible. I'm around a lot of Christians. Why are we not seeing more of this happening? I think a lot of it is a lack of will. I think we saw in the pandemic, like transformational change can happen. And there were many disability activists who said, we've been asking for accommodations so that we can work for years. And it was like, no, there's no way you can work from home. And then on a dime, we were working from home. And it was like people kind of pointing out, hey, you could have done this before. So for me, I find it as a challenge of like, where am I, what rooms am I in where I am showing a lack of will or not doing more or doing what I can to make that biblical equity and justice happen. I want to share, last week I did have the privilege of talking with, before I do this, no, I almost skipped the turn and talk. I'm not doing that. Okay, so think about your answer to this question and pick just one of the concepts, which is clearest, which is most challenging, and then talk to somebody. We're going to say for about like 3-ish minutes, so it's not a long conversation. So, and then decide, are you going to talk to somebody you're with? You're going to turn around and talk to somebody nearby you? But just think about what's one answer you have to the question, and the scriptures that Matthew shared and these concepts, and chat with someone about it for a few minutes.
Turn and talk.
Well, we could. Yeah. I think as long as I hit the action by the 3 after.
Okay.
Okay, like 2 minutes, 2 after. 3 minutes? Okay.
don't mean that in a negative way,
Okay, about 20 more seconds. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to do that.
Bring it on back.
Don't make Hubert clap. We don't want the teacher like clap once if you can hear me coming out. No, he doesn't do that. Okay. We both facilitate a lot, so it's really hard for us to not like run this microphone around the room right now and hear what you have to say. But we'll be happy to hear that another time. I will say that last week when I spoke to the middle school and high school students, I loved it. If you don't have a middle schooler or a high schooler, talk to some of them because they will give you hope. I asked them like, okay, what do these terms mean to you? And they were giving me like examples, metaphors, descriptions, like every single one of them had something to say. One of the students, one of the young people, one of the metaphors they shared was, did I do that? Was this one. They described this. They didn't pull it up on the internet, but they were like, well, it's like a fruit tree. Inequality is where like you have this tree, it's bearing fruit, and like only one person can get the fruit. But you know, the tree is leaning, so the fruit is not falling to the other person. Equality is they get the same ladder, so only one can reach. Equity is where, you know, the person on the right gets the ladder that's tall enough so they can reach, and justice is like fixing the tree so everyone, you know. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of different metaphors, and they're not all perfect, but yeah, this is what some of the middle schoolers and high schoolers brought to me. I thought another young person was talking about the importance of addressing the root causes of what caused what caused inequity, exclusion, not belonging, and talked about it being like, it's like if you put a Band-Aid over a wound, but you're not really curing what is causing the wound in the first place. So I thought it was also interesting that all of the adults were like, when we were in middle school and high school, we could not define these terms. Like, we might have had concepts about fairness, or, you know, we might have some understanding of the issues, but I know even among the white folks who were there, myself included, because I had talked to them previously, you know, it's to our detriment that we did not explicitly understand and know these comments, right? Know these terms and these concepts, and, you know, probably really connects to like things we could do or have done or haven't done in our lives. So let's talk a little bit about where are we now and how did we get here?
And if I can just add something to that, I think it shows the importance, particularly in this region, for our young people who get social emotional learning and are taught that explicitly in their schools in a way that was not being done a generation ago. So how do we get here? Where are we coming from, and how did we get to where we're at? Particularly in the use of these four terms, and I think of this in a more of the broader world. It wasn't that long ago, going back about 10 years ago now, we had here in the U.S. a series of murders of people of color by law enforcement that were very publicly, the public was made very aware of. There was documentation, and there were people with their phones, and these stories were being captured and being shared. There have been people for decades before trying and attempting and organizing and mobilizing folks around why is this taking place and why does this seem to be a systemic problem in this country and not just in one region or one community. And all of it, in many ways, was brought to a head with the murder of George Floyd, where the world saw the murder of a black man right before their eyes. And it mobilized folks across the country to start to focus on those root causes with the folks who had been doing this work many years before, because I always think it's important for us not to think something just happened like out of nowhere. And in response to that, organizations, our own community church, institutions and local governments and national governments to a certain degree started focusing more on the issues of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. Statements were made by companies, and folks were buying books and having discussions and prayer groups around these issues. And there was a real moment that seemed of conversation taking place on a large and mass scale. But like with every revolution, there's a counter-revolution. And slowly but surely, in my observation, instead of us talking about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging, and these words mean different things, started getting lumped together. And the definitions were changed, and we started hearing this phrase, the DEI hire, where lumping these words and making them seem to mean the opposite of what they meant, and being dismissive of the importance of these concepts. And this isn't new. Those of you of a certain age know the same thing happened with the phrase affirmative action. And those of you who maybe even a little older and know a little more about our history knows the same thing happened with the phrase quota, or the word quota, where quota was originally used as we only want a certain number of a certain group of people to participate, not that we need to have a certain number, but we don't want to have more than this. The phrase was used in limiting women and Jewish people and being in law schools in the early part of the 20th century. I'm most aware of it, of how it came to be used with the National Football League in the 1950s, where there was unofficially quotas of how many African Americans could be on a team at any given time. And why there's a lot of black folks in this region who never became fans of the Washington football team because it was one of the last teams to desegregate and to have more than one player at a time on the team. So these terms get used and twisted around to mean things that aren't what the original meanings are. And we now are in a period of time where colleges and universities and institutions are being attacked for supporting diversity, so supporting equity, for having language about inclusion and belonging, that is a negative, that is a bad thing, when I don't think it is. And it definitely, from a biblical standpoint and from what our faith tradition teaches us, these are things that are part of our tradition and are part of our faith, both from the teachings of Jesus and going back into the Old Testament. And you know, diversity means a lot of different things. It's not just about race and ethnicity. It's about sexual orientation, it's about geography, it's about a world of different cultural things that, for the most part, when we explore and we learn more about the variety and the diversity of the world that we live in, we all can become better from it. We can become more engaged. We can have a wider understanding of the world that we live in. And this is not something we talked about, but I thought about this in the car, and I know our time's getting short, but you know, I got the mic.
Story of my life.
I often hear people, in my life, I've often heard people say, well, you know, we have these issues. They're a problem because folks, when they're different from you, well, you know, people have fear about the people that they're different from. And I call BS on that, and I think the Lord will forgive me for that, because the people that we're often the closest to, members of our family, are sometimes the people we have the most problem with. You know, that Cain and Abel story isn't in the Bible for nothing, folks. And it's not one of the first for nothing. I was thinking about this literally driving over here, and so it's like, that's an excuse to not learn, listen, maybe to be still and be quiet when we are not the expert in the room, when we're not the most knowledgeable or the most powerful, to learn from other folks. And if we engage that with our faith, it's an opportunity for us all to grow in the love that I believe that our Lord wants for us. So, and I say this as a school teacher because I learn things from my students all the time. And they're 8, 9, 10 years old. And I'm way older than that. So anyway, you want to...
Okay, so I also, where are we now? I think Matthew shared scriptures and talked about, right now we are at a time when, there has been, it's a journey, right? Hubert talked about, there's been organizing and issues, and our country has, even in our country, has been needing to work on these issues for a long time. There have been systemic inequities. Matthew talked about the power in institutions. And we know right now, there is an assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in very dangerous, life-threatening, and serious ways. So I just want to go back to those terms and think about the opposite. So what's the opposite of diversity? Sameness. What's the opposite of equity? Unfairness, injustice. The opposite of inclusion, exclusion. The opposite of belonging, alienation. So when I hear this, we're against DEIB, it is evil, wrong, and bad, are we saying that, working across boundaries, addressing injustice, addressing exclusion, addressing alienation is bad and wrong? No, I think that is what our faith calls us to. It's what Jesus taught us. So let's think a little bit about what we can do. What can we do about these mammoth problems? And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But I think that this is, caring about these issues is core to our values at Cedar Ridge. It's right in our vision statement. I'm not going to read the whole vision statement, but I'm going to pick a few things from it. Imagine a community that dares to dream of heaven on earth, a diverse community where everyone is welcomed and respected and their journey cherished, a community where everyone belongs and looks out for the concerns of others so no one feels alone. Imagine a community of people devoted to following Jesus together, learning to live like him. Imagine that community scattered throughout the region, working as agents of love, peace, and hope wherever they are, serving our neighbors and pursuing justice with the oppressed. There's more, right? It's on our website. You can read the whole thing. So I will say in our over 10 years since I've been at Cedar Ridge, this has been an ongoing topic. And I don't think the issue of what's happening right now is that most of us don't care, right? I think most people, I know from that engagement over time and the conversations I've had in groups and the book studies and the action teams and people talking to me, most people here, if not everyone, cares about these issues. So that is not really the issue. Do we have more work to do individually and collectively? Yes, sure. Yes, we do. I will say I've talked to some other folks where it's their churches that were talking about these things have been backing off. There are some churches where you could be right now that everything we say could be heretical, evil, wrong, bad, right? That is a belief of some Christians in our country. There's a vein of Christian nationalism that is against empathy, that, all of these things. So I just want to acknowledge this is a very scary and maddening time. We know that people and communities and institutions that work towards and support diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice, even just the existence of a variety of people are under attack. We know it's impacting people in our congregation, in our families, in our communities that we care about, in the world. And what I've been experiencing at this time is that people really want connection, they want to make sense of things, and they want to figure out how to take action and try to make a difference. So, we're in the thick of it. I was told, the purpose of this is not to make you depressed, scared, et cetera, or to be overwhelming. And I will share, this week I had the good fortune to hear Catherine Hayhoe. She's an atmospheric scientist she's the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and she really fights to address climate change. And she was speaking to an interfaith group of leaders, and she reminded us with this quote, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." So now is the time for us to kind of lean into those things. And we all have to act from where we can, do what we can. We all have different skills, talents, capacities. So figure out, what is the next step for you? Where do you belong? What can you do? What can make a difference? How can you make a difference? So we're all coming from those different places, and think about what your next step is. So I'm going to just look at what some of those next steps might be. This framework of what can you do individually? What can you do in connection with other people? What can you do to address systemic issues? That's a framework we've been talking about in this church for over 10 years. So one of them is on that personal level, how are you equipping yourself for action? How are you continuing to learn? How are you staying curious? What are you paying attention to? How can you make thoughtful choices? This is a lifelong journey, right? And we've got to keep learning, growing, evolving so that we can face whatever is in front of us. At another level, interpersonally, who are you forming relationships with? What skills are you using to connect with other people? What skills are you developing? How are you creating inclusion and belonging? And I'll say, I'm looking at the time, so I will not say more about that. There could be more to say, but I'm going to just keep going. Then in terms of, again, thinking about those systemic issues, how we can make change in organizations and systems. Where do you have power and influence? Where can you connect with others to use and develop that? What can you join? How can you advocate to try to create policies, procedures, practices in organizations, in your government, et cetera? How can you organize? And by that I mean being a part of efforts that are led and informed by people who are impacted, who are trying to strategically address power in a way that will make change. And that last one of don't chase, I was listening to somebody who's kind of breaking down all the things that are happening. It's if you try to follow every single thing, you can just move from pillar, and half of it isn't even true. Some things are obfuscating. It's you cannot get yourself so overwhelmed. Yeah, we need to be informed. We got to figure out what we're paying attention to. But you can't just scroll on social media. Posting is not going to make all the change, right? So use your energy and figure out how you can get involved. I will say, the last thing I'll say is some examples at Cedar Ridge. I find Cedar Ridge as a regional church to be a real hub of connection. There are, every time I talk to somebody, they're involved in this thing, that thing. So talk to people, find out what people are doing if you're looking to get connected. Throughout this series, we've had examples. The high school students, all named examples. There's a group of high school students who are some kids at our school don't have clothes, so they're doing a service project to wash clothes and provide them to students who don't have them. They're in affinity groups to develop their leadership. There is a criminal justice team at our church. I just want to shout out that team because it's been meeting for years regularly. The Second Chance Act, it did. Look, I didn't even follow that. The Second Chance Act passed. So they have been bringing things to our community that we can learn and engage in, advocacy, et cetera. Get signed up for that team. Some members of my small group who live in Columbia, went to a Know Your Rights, How to Be a Good Ally for Immigrants workshop and passed that information on. And I know that information has been used by some people who need it. So there's so many things you can do. Ruth has made a great flyer. And now, instead of turning and talking, the last thing I want you to do, Matthew's going to come up in a second and we're going to go into communion, is to think about, use that time of contemplation to think about, where are you right now? What are the things that you need? What are the things that you can do? What is the next step that makes sense for you in your capacity? Now Matthew will come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Hubert.